Hello, everyone. We want to welcome you to Allene's birthday party. Betty and I.
You have to talk 90% of the time because you did 90% of the work.
No, it's only because we have good vendors. Good vendors, everyone. We had such a good time doing this, and we had such a good time meeting Allene's family over the phone. And so I'd like you all to meet Allene's son, who we fondly call Tim Jim, whose real name is Timothy. Tim.
Well, thank you so much, all of you, for coming. My heart is so full. On behalf of my family, I want to thank you all so much from the bottom of my heart for coming here to honor my mom on her 90th birthday. A special shout out to Robin Montgomery and Betty Francis. And so many generous benefactors, and all of you. Thank you so much for making this an unforgettable day forever for all of us. Well, the first thing I'm going to tell you about my mom is that I'm so forgetful. When I was a kid, she used to have to sew my name into my sweaters because I kept leaving them in buses and cafeterias. So now that you know how absent-minded I am, I hope that you will forgive me for using some notes for my talk today, because there's a lot to say about this wonderful lady. As we gather here to celebrate my mom's first 90 years, you're all well acquainted with her role as beloved queen of Palm Springs society and journalism, how she's gladdened the hearts of countless people, not only through her brilliant, sparkling wit and writing, but because of her sincere love for the desert, its people, and all the good works they do. You know, we've heard the cynical expression that no good deed goes unpunished. Well, here in the desert, no good deed goes unheralded, thanks in large part to my mom. But she was already a star and a blessing in countless lives, long before she came to Palm Springs in 1979. So I thought you'd all like to hear more about her life before it became entwined with critters such as gabors, rat packers, fringe-toed lizards, and the bighorn sheep. Mom was born in Lewiston, Tennessee, which had recently changed its name from Lost Creek, or Lost Crick, as they pronounced it there. My dad used to tease her about being from Lost Crick, and I guess nobody really wants to say they're from there, and I guess that's why they changed it. Her birth name was Willie Allene Stout. Now, Willie was not an uncommon name for females in the South at the time, and so she bravely struggled with it until she kept getting enrolled in boys' gym classes at school. And so she finally, at one point, tossed old Willie into a chasm, and we haven't seen old Willie since. From her dad, she got strength, wit, endurance, dignity, and a sense of adventure. From her mom, she got more wit, sparkle, a joie de vivre, and brightness in every way, and a great big heart. Her family followed her dad's wanderlust to Ohio, back to Tennessee, back to California, back to Tennessee, and back to California for good, finally, just in time to enjoy the 1933 Long Beach earthquake. It wasn't her fault. Now, I just said earthquake, and then I said it wasn't her fault. Now, groan, fault, earthquake. You're supposed to really groan at that one. You weren't supposed to applaud. You're supposed to groan. Well, her whole family endured all the Great Depression in South Central Los Angeles with courage, spirit, and good humor. And she had to endure rheumatic fever, too. She grew up adoring Hollywood and glamour and reading magazines about stars, foreshadowing her future career. She did a lot of other reading and writing, too, devouring novels and journalism, picking up and developing writing skills that would later bless us all. And later, she'd wind up writing about and being a colleague of some of the same celebrities that she idolized as a Depression youngster. In World War II, through church and other social programs. She wrote to scores of GIs all through the war to keep the greatest generation connected, inspired, and feeling the warmth of the home fires as they whipped the dictators all over the world. As beautiful on the outside as she is on the inside, and that's very beautiful, she was a model for many years. She was Girl Friday to a famous DJ named Peter Potter, who had Peter Potter's Platter Parade on KFWB 98. Yay, let's hear it for Peter Potter. And then in 1950, she followed him onto a mysterious new animal called television. She was kind of a Girl Friday on the show. She was a big part of the show's appeal. She would bring Peter things, hold things up. She was sort of an early version of Vanna White, except my mom has turned more letters and more beautifully than Vanna ever did. She also worked with Eddie Albert on his TV show, never suspecting that many years later they would have a Gabor in common. Didn't Charles Dickens write a book called Our Mutual Gabor? Well, he should have. In 1951, she married my father, who was a restaurateur, an all-around go-getter and promoter, and she helped him in countless ways with his various eateries all over Southern California. Their most famous and enduring success was the Courtroom, which they ran in La Jolla from 1958 to 1974. The Courtroom was the place to be in La Jolla, which itself was the place to be. Everyone loved that place. It featured delectable cuisine in a regal setting, and at the same time had one of the earliest sports bars anywhere. My dad kind of invented the sports bar. The San Diego Chargers hung out there, for heaven's sake, and you can imagine what a thrill it was for shrimpy little me, football-loving 7-year-old me, to have the Chargers coming to Mom and Dad's place all the time. The dating game used it as a prize destination for winning couples. It got well-deserved praise from everyone. We had Camelot, my dad once said, but we didn't know it. Well, everyone else knew it. And the Queen of Camelot was indispensable. She helped plan the menus, produced them too. She hand-lettered each and every menu, and a lot of them were pilfered as souvenirs. So she made more of them. She hired staff. She served as hostess frequently, her charming welcome becoming an even better reason to come to the Courtroom. And she managed the place on her own for a few years. Well, most importantly for the world, Mom started writing a gossipy but ingenious little column about the courtroom doings for the La Jolla Light newspaper. A very appropriate name, since that's when her writing skills first really came to light. Since it was an ad, of course, we paid for it. Well, before long, the Light's editor told her, look, your columns are so great and everyone loves them so much. Why don't you start writing a column about La Jolla for us and we'll pay you? And so, thus it was for 16 years. She covered everything in La Jolla and delighted readers with her wit, charm, and grace. Later, she became the Light Society editor. She won several awards, including one from the San Diego Press Club. Lots of stiff competition for that one. And she did all this in addition to managing the courtroom and serving as PTA president and having a couple of hip replacements. Now, let me explain. That's not getting rid of some hip friends and replacing them with hipper friends. Although I guess people do that too. I mean the kind of hip replacement that makes you limp and makes you sometimes use a cane and crutches for a while. But she kept on going on and amazing us in so many ways. Oh yes, and all the while she raised my daughter, her daughter and me, and 2 dachshunds. Now I'm not sure which is more difficult, to keep 2 dachshunds or a teenage girl or me behaving. But she managed to do it all. In my defense, at least I never chewed up the couch. I did shoot a few BBs into places where BBs should not be shot, but never mind. Well, you know, she nurtured us all every day. Even the tiny dachshund puppy who wouldn't eat. So she fed him warm milk with an eyedropper. That's so sweet. I get choked up every time I remember that. You know something? She never had to feed me with an eyedropper. So after such an illustrious career in La Jolla, it should come as no surprise that the Desert Sun recruited her as its society editor. And I mean forcefully recruited. She politely declined the first offer, not wanting to leave the Light or La Jolla. But they kept pursuing her until she said yes. And you know the rest of the story. In a land of glamour and brilliance, ever since my mom has shone here as one of the brightest stars in the Coachella constellation. And as I learned when I was a 16-year-old amateur astronomer, stars shine the brightest in the desert. Again, I'll let others talk about her Palm Springs career. I just like to say that my mom is the most wonderful person I've ever known. And it's kind of nice when the best person you ever knew is your mom. I'll never stop being grateful to her in so many ways. Huge heart, brilliant mind, tremendous strength of character, real strength all around in every way, especially deep inside where it counts the most. She blessed everything she ever touched, especially me. And I love you very much, Mom. I'd like to close with a few lines from Rudyard Kipling's poem, If. Now, I won't read all of it because we'd be here for another 90 years if I did. But I'll read just some of the excerpts with a few adjustments for the occasion. If you can keep your head while all about you are losing theirs and blaming you for good measure. If you can trust yourself when the world dumps on you and give the world back only treasure. If you can dream and of your dreams be master. If you can think and share your thoughts for everyone's gain. If you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same. If you can force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve your turn long after they're gone, and so hold on when there is nothing left in you except the will which says to them, hold on. If nothing on earth can stop you, if all can count on you, and it's never too much, if you can talk with all and make them see their virtues, or walk with stars, nor lose the human touch. If you can fill 90 years with centuries worth of love and charm, yours is the earth and everything in it. And what's more, you'll be Allene, my mom. And, oh, by the way, triumph and disaster, I don't know if Kipling knew that, but those were our two dachshunds that she helped take care of. And they were imposters when they look up at you with those big brown eyes, but we treated them just the same. Well, I'd like to introduce my sister, Shelley, whom I always thought of as my kooky teenage sister. When I was about 6 and she was about 15, I'd give her tokens of brotherly affection, such as putting rubber snakes and spiders in her bed. What? They weren't real. I thought about using real ones, but I didn't. I mean, we had them in the backyard, too, but I thought it would be too cruel to frighten the spiders and snakes.
And I'm going to speak last.
Yeah. She's going to get me for that later. Anyway, she's still my beloved kooky teenage sister, even though now she's an award-winning teacher and helps educate other people's kooky teenagers. So she'll talk about my mom from the all-important teenage daughter's perspective. Please welcome Shelley Fletcher.
Yeah. Well, wait a minute. First of all, do I need a microphone? No. Okay, that's what I figured. Mom raised me right. You heard she was the showbiz mom. I was going to be the next Ethel Merman. I don't know what's wrong. Okay. All right. I have something important to say. Mom came into my life at a wonderful time of life. Yeah. I was about 5 years old, and she wanted to be the perfect stepmom, make a good impression on the cute little girl. Let's take her to Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. So she took me to the movies, where I saw the wicked stepmother burst into tears with hysterical, and she had to take me into the lobby. She never did get to see the movie. So because of that, Mom, I'm going to ask, would you come up here and sit down for just a minute? Because I have a letter that I had to write to Mr. Disney. Come on, Mom. Well, Mom's coming up here. I would just like to tell you what a great mom she is. I told you she took me to the movies so I'd learn about stepmothers. I can remember her giving me, and she made it all herself, Shelley's art kit. She took an overnight bag and put pipe cleaners and crayons and scissors and construction paper. I thought that was such a great gift. I have what my husband calls my kindergarten mentality. I would never use anything because then it would be all used up and gone. And so consequently, when I was 40, I came across it, and all the little local mice had been nibbling at the paper. They enjoyed the art kit. I also want to tell you about 6-year-old Shelley who would come visit her stepmom and her dad, and because I was madly in love with Hopalong Cassidy, Mom had decorated the room with cowboy wallpaper and bunk beds. Is that awesome or what? Okay. And then my cousin David is sitting over here, and his sister is my age, and David and Diane and I would come to visit Mom, and we love to play Queen Elizabeth. I got to be the queen, you know, where Mom would donate her jewelry box, all the rhinestones, all the necklaces. We'd take the bed sheets off the bed to make the cape. We made David carry the cape, of course. Sorry, David. Okay. Then I'd like to talk to you about that 8-year-old Shelley who needed a cultural experience. So Mom had Dad go to Tijuana to buy me a little dress from Tijuana so that I could go to the Blessing of the Animals in downtown L.A., all dressed up. She even put gold earrings on me. Is that classy or what? Very authentic. I remember her writing a letter to a girlfriend saying that Shelley is in that in-between age. For my 11th birthday, she gave me 2 magazine subscriptions, Jack and Jill and Teen Magazine. I liked them both, you know. And then there was the classy Shelley, 12 years old, having lunch, Easter brunch at the La Valencia in La Jolla, and saying, ooh, what's that? Eat it. Okay. And then, this is the best of all. Tim, Jim, whatever we get to call him. Tim told you about how Mom corresponded for years with many, many soldiers. And I don't know how many of you are in on Mom's secret, but she is writing a book having to do with all of these wonderful letters that she kept. Can you imagine being a love-struck 13-year-old girl, and your mom brings in this old box with all of these letters tied in ribbons? She saved every one of those letters. And I got to read through every one of those love letters from all of those soldiers in World War II. Oh my gosh, I wanted to be just like Mom when I grew up. They all loved her, see, and they still do, all right? And then probably the thing that made the biggest impact on my life, smart alecky, 15-year-old Shelley, I don't need education, I don't need books, I just need to do my own thing. And she said, here, read this. And she wouldn't let me turn on television or a radio, and it was a book. And it was called The Egg and I. And I read that book, and I learned something that I never knew existed, the power of words. How somebody could write words and change my perception of everything. When I finished The Egg and I, book number 2 was Wuthering Heights. You see, I'm well-rounded, you know. So Mom turned me on to writing, turned me on to education, just turned me on to constant learning. as she's done with millions of people ever since. And then there's the high school years and the dances and the football games and all the usual teenage drama, teaching me how to budget so that I could go off to college and not blow the budget. And then even after I got to be an adult and I had children, she would allow my grandchildren to fondly refer to her as Grandma Wino. You can ask me about that later, privately. But more than anything else, I appreciate the relationship that I have with Mom now as an adult. Because I have to tell you, I couldn't ask for a better confidant, a better inspiration, or a better friend. Okay, this is my letter to Mr. Disney. Dear Mr. Disney, you goofed. You've got the wrong idea of the wicked stepmother. I think you should remake the movie with what a stepmother really should be. So I have an alphabetical list of what a stepmother should be. She should be adored, like Princess Diana. Have an adventurous spirit, like Amelia Earhart. The allure of Elizabeth Taylor. Artistic, like Grandma Moses. Attitude, like Auntie Mame. An admired author, like Louisa May Alcott. The beauty of Maureen O'Hara. I always used to think Allene was Maureen O'Hara, just in disguise or something. The business savvy of Mrs. Fields. The charm of Princess Grace Kelly. Civic-minded, like Nancy Reagan. The class of Jackie Onassis. The courageousness of Joan of Arc. The cuteness of Shirley Temple. The dedication of Eleanor Roosevelt. The depth of Meryl Streep. The diva status as Cher. The domesticity as June Cleaver. I am from the television generation, Be a dynamic person like Ethel Merman. She should be effective like Margaret Mead. Effervescent like Charles. She should be environmentally correct like Rachel Carson. She should be feminine like Audrey Hepburn. She should have feminine mystique like Kim Novak. She should be a feminist like Betty Friedan or have fortitude like Katharine Hepburn. She should be funny like Betty White, gifted gab like Hedda Hopper, glamorous like Marilyn Monroe, grace like Ginger Rogers, humor like Carol Burnett, innocence of Margaret O'Brien, intelligence as Sandra Day O'Connor, leggy like Betty Grable, lovable like Shirley Jones, politeness like Miss Manners, power like Gloria Steinem, resourcefulness like Heloise, sexiness like Sophia Loren, spiritual like Amy Semple McPherson, spunkiness like Lucille Ball, strength like Rose Kennedy, sultry like Gina Lollobrigida, talent like Barbara Streisand, tenacity like Barbara Walters, tenderness like Aunt Bee of Newberry, versatile like Mary Martin, a voice like Rosemary Clooney, and she has that, voluptuous like Bridget Bardot, the wisdom of Ann Landers, and the wit of Irma Bombeck. And Mr. Disney, you don't have to look hard for that perfect stepmother. I just read a perfect description of the lady sitting right here.
Well, the Desert Sun isn't the only lucky recipient of my mom's tremendous talents. Palm Springs Life magazine is beloved and read and avidly awaited the world over, and Mom has made many contributions to it. So to talk more about that is the man who edited it for many years, Mr. Stuart Weiner.
Gee, Allene, you raised such modest, quiet people. That's so nice, really. I'm here to, it's a great honor, really, okay, to be here to honor her. I've known Allene ever since there were 2 lakes here, so this is really good. You know the saying that behind every great writer is a great editor. Well, forget that, because only lousy editors say that. Okay, the truth is, in front of every great editor is a great writer. And I was very lucky to have found Allene Arthur when I first moved here. As Jamie Price will tell you, it was very difficult to find writers here who could actually do the things that you wanted to do. Every restaurant was a cornucopia. Every story would start out with, let's face it, let's face it, you're stuck in traffic, let's face it, yeah? Okay, kind of sing-songy kind of stuff. And so, anyway, I'm out here looking for people, and I was going to San Francisco and Los Angeles and LA, and I was bringing people here, and the publisher was not throwing money off of a moving truck, to say the least. So we had to, we offered them spa treatments and hotel reservations, things like that. But finally, Allene enters my life, and it was a miracle because she got it. She got me immediately. She knew exactly what I wanted to do with it. And she knew I wanted the stories that people, not just advertisers, wanted to read. So I could assign her anything. I could be assured when I did that she would produce copy that was accurate and also fun to read. She knows where all the bodies are buried around here, and she doesn't mind picking up a shovel to dig them up. She was just the guide I needed. For example, I sent her out to interview a guy named Frank Zane, this huge bodybuilder. She writes, he looks like he could wipe out a small armored division. Not just a division, but a small armored division. And it brings up her real strength, which is supportive detail. She's amazing in doing things that, instead of just having a noun, she will have extra adjectives. She will really describe it beautifully. For example, she did a story called Return of the Honeymooners, where she talked about all of the famous weddings that had gone on out here. So this is what she says, and I quote, the wedding featured, quote, a fountain of fireworks, which is really wonderful when you think about that, what's a great image, sprayed into the sky behind a wedding arbor where Dom Perignon was poured for the 265 guests, and the tented tennis courts featured a 6-foot cake flown in from Australia and caviar from Russia. Okay, so we have a fountain of fireworks, we have 265 guests, we have a 6-foot cake. All right there is the secret to her great journalism. She knew the number of guests, the height of the cake, the origin of the food served, all the details that make the story come alive. And here's another little example, this little nugget from a story she wrote about Elvis Presley's days here. He preferred tight pants, she quotes Maury Geyer, famous, you all remember him. He produced clothes that now look really hip, okay? They all look like the people from the movie Swingers. But he preferred tight pants in the Orange family. Okay, a normal writer would have just stopped there. No. Salmon, peach, pumpkin, she goes on and on with a number of things in the Orange family. And of course, the people around Elvis all talk to Allene for the story. Hell, everybody talks to Allene. Some even regret it. She did a great story for me on the history of Thunderbird Country Club, for example. She didn't mind revealing some of the things in the club's past that maybe they might not have would like to forget. And I noticed in her weekly column for Betty's section that everybody still talks to her. I was so privileged to be able to edit her stuff for so many years, and I'm happy to be celebrating this significant birthday. I think she'd appreciate all my supportive detail here. Thanks.
Well, my mom was not the only hot acquisition by the Desert Sun in 1979. About the same time, a young fellow named Bruce Fessier came aboard, and we're all glad he did ever since. And he's here today. Bruce?
There was a sarcastic MC at a social event one time who said, "This is a very prestigious crowd here tonight. It's the A to Z list." And I'm here representing the Z list. My wife was just telling Leslie Avriette over here, the first time that she met Allene, she goes, "I can't believe she works in the same building as Bruce." And that was one of the interesting things about Allene. One of her strengths was that she could straddle any social strata. She could hang out with the A-list, and then she'd go back to work and hang out with the Z-list. I mean, I got to say that Ted Grofer put together a great little newspaper when we started. It was one of the fastest growing newspapers in the country. And he was the president of the Chamber of Commerce at the time, so that tells you the commitment the newspaper had to the community. But it was old school journalism. I mean, there were heavy drinkers on that staff. I mean, I'd come into work in the morning, the city editor would be reeking of bourbon, the news editor would be reeking of bourbon. We had a great editor in Lyle Shoemaker. I mean, this is a guy who was a remember Lyle? Yeah, yeah. He was a World War II war correspondent who was at Iwo Jima when Joe Rosenthal put the flag up and took that. He didn't put the flag up, but he took the picture that was so famous. And Lyle brought in Joe Rosenthal to speak to us one time. It was really great. But the first week I was at the Desert Sun, Lyle took us all out to Las Casuelas Terraza for his birthday celebration. This is like my 5th day there, and I got so drunk. everybody was drinking heavily, and I just couldn't keep up. And I'm thinking, I'm not going to last on this newspaper if I keep doing this. And who would guess that 35 years later, I mean, I was thinking I got to last 2 years. 35 years later, here Allene and I are still writing for that newspaper. I mean, I could tell you about some of the other people in our newspaper. I mean, she had a reporter, Gary Calandro, he was a Marine who had his name tattooed on his arm. And I don't know how far we want to go, but eventually he became wanted by Interpol. There was another society writer named Eunice Field that she once had to bail out of Indio County Jail. But, you know, when I just interviewed her recently, you probably saw the column I did on her. One thing I didn't put in the story was she said that her biggest challenge writing for the Desert Sun was focusing. And in that crowd, you can understand why. I was one of those people in that crowd. I mean, originally when I was on the city desk and like I said, it was old school journalism. I was the only person who didn't smoke on the city desk. Everybody's writing, you know, something out of the front page, you know. And then society, and I was promoted entertainment editor, and sports. We were all moved to the annex, you know, which was a division of the newspaper across an alley. I mean, first of all, we were in a strip mall, you know. I mean, but so I would occasionally bring in some of the people that I'd be interviewing, you know, and these were theatrical people, musical people, and they were really theatrical people because they'd walk in and go, ta-da! And they'd give me their act, and Allene would look up, and she'd put in earplugs. And she'd be writing away on her yellow pad, you know. She always wrote on this yellow pad and then would type it in afterwards. And, you know, so it was like, you know, we could just go on and be loud and crazy, and Allene would work, you know. It's amazing how she produced so many great columns in that atmosphere. But, you know, I got to say, another thing that she did for the Desert Sun, when we started, the Press Enterprise was actually the highest circulation newspaper in the Coachella Valley. And I think one reason was this lady right here, Gloria Greer. And I've done a lot of research on the history of this Coachella Valley in Palm Springs, and I've seen what kind of pages we had before Allene got to our desert living section, and it was called the women's section at one time. And it was like a half a page, or sometimes when there was a big event, there'd be 2 or 3 pages. And then Allene came along, and she was able to keep up with Gloria. And suddenly we would have 10-page society sections. And it was primarily because this woman was willing to go out and cover 2 and 3 events in one night. I mean, this is, to those of us on the Z list, we would look at her and she's going, is that a bonnet she's wearing? I mean, she'd be going out to these luncheons and covering things like this, and then she'd be going out to a dinner that evening, and then there'd be something else after the dinner that she'd go to. So of course, if you give coverage to these type of social events, there's more social events because they like that kind of coverage. And by the time that I took over her job, and they didn't call it a society editor because it just didn't fit on me. They called me the people and entertainment editor. And by the 90s, we didn't have the section space that Allene had, and so we had to cut down on things. And the first thing that I cut out was basically the private parties, and that was, you know, some of the best stories that Allene and Gloria used to write about, and I know that Gloria regretted that we had to cut that out. I mean, you used to write for us too. But that's an interesting thing that happened, is that Gloria and Allene created such a demand for social events, and then we had to just prioritize with charity events, that the charities began flourishing. And the charities were always very popular here in the Valley, but I think that they just really increased in popularity during Allene's term at the Desert Sun, and we had these explosions of celebrity golf tournaments. You know, I mean, there was 2 or 3 celebrity golf tournaments a week, and it created an industry. And today we have 8, 10 pages in Betty Francis's section again, and it's become such an important part of the Coachella Valley. It's now recognized as an industry, and and I think that Allene deserves a lot of credit for really developing that industry. So it's been a pleasure for me to be friends with her for all these years, and you know, I love you, Allene.
Well, we have a sad duty to perform here. Sooner or later, we're going to have to cut the most amazing cake anyone's ever seen right behind me that has one of Mom's columns on it. But I believe it is time for birthday cake.
All right. As I said, I'm touched and thrilled and flattered and delighted and a bunch of other adverbs and grateful, of course. And I'm grateful to my dear son who started the ball rolling for this, and to Betty Francis who perpetuated the arrangements, and to Robert Montgomery who coordinated the whole thing and did most of the work, and which included inviting the sponsors who paid for the whole thing. And so I have become 90 years of age, and it happened without me giving permission. And it was nothing that I did through any skill or talent at all. It just happened. It was nothing I did on purpose, and it's automatic, becoming 90, and anybody can do it. So age is a matter of perspective. Now, we all remember when we thought 30 was old and we thought 40 was ancient. And I only became age sensitive at age 50. And I still remember when my rascal nephew, David Pennington, who is here today, teased and tortured me about his threat to put an ad, a classified ad in the paper congratulating me on becoming 50. Well, as the years went by, I avoided mentioning my age, excepting to doctors and dentists. And if anyone asked me directly how old I was, I would knock off 10 years. And then if they asked me, and I seemed to get away with it, and if they asked me how old my son was, I knocked 10 years off his age too. And I thought, of course, that the younger he was, the younger I would seem to be. And then I realized that men liked younger women, so I thought, okay, I'll be younger. And then I was stewing in guilt because I thought, what kind of a mother are you to lie about your son's age to gratify your own vanity? And now I don't knock off 10 years because I think it would be a little silly to be 90 and pretend to be 80. My friend Bronnie Jevrick, who is here today somewhere, encouraged me, but when he said to me recently, "Don't you know that 90 is the new 50?" So, but all of you are going to be 90 someday. And I must tell you, it ain't so bad. I will tell you that people do treat you differently when you're at this advanced age. Nurses, for example, in hospitals or doctors' offices, when they greet you and they see that age number on the chart, they speak more slowly and they speak louder and they enunciate more clearly, and they call you dear, and they help you up onto the examination table. Well, I'm not insulted. They're trying to help me, and I could really use some help getting up on the examination table. So, another advantage is that when you're 90 and you make a mistake or do something wrong, people give you a pass. And they say, "Oh, bless her heart. She's 90, you know." So, another perspective might be that Greg Burton, who is the executive editor of the Desert Sun, for which I work, was 15 years old when I first started writing for the Desert Sun. And that's 1979, when I was hired by Ted Grofer. And since that time, I've written almost 2,500 columns for the Desert Sun. And before that, 600 columns approximately for the La Jolla Light. And I've written 33 features for Palm Springs Life magazine. And yeah, I wrote many of those features for Jamie Pricer when she was its editor for so many years, and many features for Stuart Weiner when he was its editor for many years. But none of that was my first column. My first column was written, I wrote during World War II, when I was a 19-year-old secretary at the Acme Brewing Company in Vernon, California. I wrote a a column for the monthly newsletter for employees. I was sort of a roving reporter, and I would go around and ask the question of the month of the bottlers and the brewers and the keg dock workers and the office personnel. And the question of the month might be something like, do you think a husband should help a wife with the housework? Or it would be a wartime question, such as, do you think women should engage in combat? And so that was my first column. And the name of that column, by the way, was Rambling About with Allene Stout. So I have written items about everybody in this room through the years, and I'll continue to do so. So I do hope you'll do something interesting. Thank you. Thank you so much. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Allene. Happy birthday to you.
Well, Mom, you make 90 sound like so much fun. I'm sure all of us can't wait to get there. I just want to thank you all again so much. And I think what we all want to be when we grow up is Allene Arthur. So, thank you all, and God bless.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll see you again in 10 years at 100.
Yeah, right.